Hello, everyone. To briefly introduce myself, I'm a fourth year here at Georgetown. And as you may have already inferred, my academic interests are in the intersection of physics and biology. But my academic goals are not my only one. My ultimate goal is to join the medical profession, working at both the bench and the bedside. Now, the faculty here at Georgetown, my friends and family, have all helped me tremendously get to where I am today. And so while I'll be very anxiously looking forward to making the transition from here to med school, where I'll be actually starting next fall, I can't help but reflect on what has helped me get to where I am today. The faculty here at Georgetown has helped me fit into a family that doesn't force me to choose one interest over another. And my friends, well, my roommates, both past and present, will probably attest to the fact that I'm a bit much to handle, at times. And unfortunately, my family will likely make the same claim, that I'm a lot to handle, not just sometimes, but all the time. And though they have helped me mold myself in very different ways, in retrospect, I think each of them have contributed to a single common attitude, a mindset, if you will. And so what I hope to impress upon some of you today is that perhaps through this mindset, there's a bit of a more rational approach for us to better ourselves, and in effect, that ultimately we can all succeed. To begin my talk, I'd like to share with you a small but significant piece of my childhood. Before immigrating to the States, I used to live in South Korea with my parents. And while my memories of that time are few, those that have stayed with me today are of me with my grandparents. It was because during this time, my father was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder known as the Guillain-Barré syndrome. It affects nearly 1 in 20,000 people each year. And while the cause is unknown, recent evidence suggests that it's often preceded by some sort of infection. The onset of the syndrome is characterized by a weakness and a tingling sensation in your extremities, so your fingers and your toes. My father first succumbed to this disease when he and I were participating in a relay race at school. He fell over. And it was within the subsequent days that followed that he was hospitalized for over a year. My mother and I still talk about the difficulties of that time. Usually these conversations come up when I'm being difficult or unreasonable about whatever thing I'm obsessed about. And in one particular memory, I had been fooling around, and I had fallen over, and I spilled coffee. Spilled coffee all over my mother's textbooks and notes. And to give you some context, my mother was studying to become an accountant while my father was sick because she was worried that if he never regained his full motor function due to the paralysis that had progressed from his fingers and toes, that she would have to become the new breadwinner of my family. So becoming an accountant was never something that she desired to do on a personal basis. It was something she found as an alternative, the only alternative. And I remember this so very clearly because it was the first time I had seen my mother cry. In another particular memory, I remember she had told me in passing to my father, why you? Of all people who could have gotten this disease from whatever infection he may have had before that was non-symptomatic, why you? And my father's reply was this: why not me? Let that question sink in for a little bit, because this question of why not me effectively invalidates the presumed rationality of its counterpart question, why? Because, who'd want to be sick? Now, to a philosopher, this clash, this conflict between the two questions of why me and why not me stems from what they would call desert claims and entitlement claims. These two types of claims are very different in that a typical desert claim is a claim to the effect that we deserve something. Someone deserves something from someone else on some basis. A typical example of that is the typical student. We think we put in our best effort, the most excellent piece of work, and we submit it. And we think we deserve the highest grade possible from the teacher. When in fact, we have no way of producing evidence to suggest the claim that, we are entitled to a high grade. We can only wish to deserve one. Now, from a third-party perspective, it's easy for us to distinguish whether other people are deserving but not entitled, or whether they're entitled but not deserving. It's easy for us because we're naturally hardwired to make that distinction. As a society, we are often quick to judge others. And by extension, we have the natural capability to make this decision. But like many other things, it's often difficult for us to judge ourselves, to assess ourselves and decide whether we are confusing the two different kinds of claims in our own daily lives. For me, this distinction became very clear at a very stressful time, high school, which I hope was a stressful time for many others, because other than that, I'd be very weird. I was a total geek back then, and I suppose back then isn't very accurate because I'm a total geek now, but nonetheless, I was a total geek back then, and being in a very science-oriented high school, I did a lot of science fairs. And after some success at the school and county fairs, I developed this subconscious impression of myself and my work that we were deserving of the accolades that were given to us. And I think it's because in the beginning, I came in without any expectations. It may be hard to believe, but I came in with just true curiosity, curious to know what other people had done, curious to know what it's like to share what I had done. It was the exchange of ideas and personal experiences that really motivated me to go out there and talk. At my first state fair, my mother and I drove 2.5 hours to Lexington, Virginia, from where I lived in Centerville. And for the two of us who thought a 45-minute drive to high school was a long commute, you can imagine how daunting it was for us to drive 2.5 hours straight from Centerville to Lexington on an interstate highway that had no cars and no gas stations, for one, no restaurants on the side. So we were in very unfamiliar territory. And for those of us who aren't very accustomed to casual American dining back then, Applebee's, being the only restaurant within a 10-mile radius of the motel that we were staying in, it wasn't the best choice for us. And especially from my mother, who wasn't too fond of steaks and, the usual Applebee's kind of dining. She cooked Korean cuisine on a daily basis because that's all she knew. And so you can imagine how difficult it was for us to force ourselves to eat Applebee's. To be honest, I didn't even know how I liked my steak cooked back then. I only pretended to know so that she would worry less. So we drove the 2.5 hours, we ate at Applebee's, and I say it as if it's some kind of punishment, but in all fairness, I love Applebee's now. And I stayed up all night practicing my presentation. But to summarize how the fair actually went, let me give you these details. When I got to the stage where we were presenting, the girl next to me brought a 6.5-foot poster that was laid on top of a 2-foot table, so I had to look up at the ceiling to see what her title was. So basically, I was intimidated the moment I got in. The judges that were assigned to me got there late, so within a 2-hour judging frame, they were an hour and a half late, so I basically had 2 minutes to present to all of them all at once. You can imagine how wronged I felt then. And lastly, there were a couple of special award judges that had come from different industries and professional organizations, and I was hoping that a couple of the judges from the US Navy or any military branch for that matter would come by and just express interest, because I had done my work during my sophomore and junior years of high school at the US Naval Research Lab in downtown Washington, D.C. No one came. No one. I felt wronged, I admit. I had put in so much effort. I had put in so much to this for 2 years during high school, with all the other high school drama that comes along with it. What had I done to deserve this? What had I not done, actually, to deserve this? At this point, let me introduce a quote by Albert Einstein. He says, "A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feeling, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion. A delusion that keeps us imprisoned. It's a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our own personal desires and affection for a few persons nearest to us. And so our task must be to free ourselves from this kind of prison by widening our circle of compassion." Now, I think it was at that state fair, sitting in front of my poster, seeing everyone, all the other students, equally anxious, fingers fiddling, legs shaking, palms sweaty like I am right now, that I realized that I wasn't alone in thinking that I deserved something. I wasn't alone. Moreover, what I realized was that I couldn't accurately or objectively assess my own efforts and come to a conclusion about how much compensation my efforts deserved or what they merited. I'd be acting as both the judge and jury of my own trial. Now, it isn't to say that we must always go around comparing ourselves to others. The last thing I want to impress upon you is that life is nothing but the Hunger Games. Rather, it's that in realizing the universality of the common struggles we face, we may, as Einstein put it, be able to free ourselves and open our eyes to the ways that other people have come to adapt and overcome obstacles that we are facing now. In doing so, we learn from each other. We become more flexible and become more understanding. And in effect, I hope that we can become better. In other words, if we set aside the metrics of our own efforts, metrics that we designed ourselves, mind you, then we'll realize that everyone is deserving in some way or another, in their own way. And isn't that ultimately compassion? By being compassionate, we put ourselves in other people's shoes. We learn from each other, and in effect, about ourselves. We learn what we are lacking. And I believe that if our passions are genuine, we will become motivated by this enlightenment to act on what we lack. To act on what we lack, and in effect, to become better. I, for one, didn't think that I should be sitting around anymore. And so what I did was I got up and I dragged my 150-pound rotund self over to two highly well-built, extremely well-built naval officers who had been going around the different engineering projects, and I told them, can I give you a spiel about my project? I think you'd be interested. And I just walked right around. I walked right back to my poster, hoping that they'd follow, and thank the Lord they did, because otherwise I'd be very embarrassed. I gave them my spiel, I thanked them, and they left. No score, no judging. They just said thanks, and then they left. A minute later, though, a much older gentleman in much more elaborate military wear approached me, and what he has said still sticks with me today. He said, it takes guts and confidence in the science you've done to be able to drag two naval officers and force-feed them your stuff. The word force-feed kind of still bothers me, but nonetheless, that's what he said, so. So the point is this: when you abandon this irrational idea that you deserve something, this irrational idea that convinces you that you are entitled to something that you can only wish to deserve, then perhaps you'll realize that in opening your eyes, you can, in fact, feel and experience the equally human experience of others. The equally human experience of others. You'll be doing what they've done, feeling what they've felt, by recognizing what they've done to reach the same goals that you share and have overcome the same obstacles that you aim to do so right now. It's all we can ever hope to do, to be best by being compassionate. And so what does this mean? Specifically, it means reconciling all of the different lessons that these experiences teach you. Really pulling them in together and making them your own, to act on them in your own way. For me to be me. Let that sink in. For me to be me. And that's actually the most important and first piece of advice that I got from my new student orientation advisor when I started out at Georgetown. My NSO advisor told me, you do you. You know, I'd been asking him earnestly, what clubs should I join? How do I join them? And he just simply said, you do you. You know, it's tossed around a lot, that phrase. And it feels kind of annoying and insulting when you're asking for real information and he just says, you do you. And it took me my first 2 years at Georgetown to really take that to heart. But when I did, I increasingly felt more empowered to do all the things I needed to get done. More importantly, I felt empowered to do all the things I needed to do on the side to get all the things I needed to get done. And so for you, if that means singing in the shower is the only way to relieve your stress, do it. I mean, I did, roommate permitting, of course. If wearing your Timbs with sweatpants and a checkered down button shirt, terrible fashion, arguably a leading fashion, but if that's how you get through the day, feeling comfortable, do that. Who cares how people look at you? The only person winning is you at the end of the day. If you don't understand something during lecture, and I emphasize during lecture about that lecture, ask your questions. Then and now. Right? You're there to learn, not to simply receive. Who cares how annoying your questions might be to your professor or your friends? I mean, you're the one there to learn. Who cares if it'll reflect badly on what perception your intelligence will be to other people? Because at the end of the day, you'll realize that that's totally irrelevant when you realize that you being you is doing you justice. You're showing yourself compassion, and that's my final message. Because you are the one person who actually deserves the greatest amount of compassion. And my argument for that is, there is no other metric in that scenario. There is no one else like you. Thank you.